Building a family can be a complicated, messy, lonely, and sometimes heartbreaking process. But you don't have to navigate this challenging journey alone.
Welcome to the All Paths podcast, where we support and celebrate all of the different ways there are to try to grow your family. We are your hosts, Kate and Emily from the nonprofit organization All Paths Family Building. And today we're talking with Jodi about her family's journey. Jodi, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I am truly thrilled to join you, to be with you for this conversation.
We're so happy to. So before we get into your family building journey in more detail, we'd love for you to introduce yourself briefly for our listeners.
Absolutely. I am Jodi Mitchel Tolman. I have 3 children. They're grown and gone and happy, healthy, and functioning members of society. And I have an interesting story in that my husband and I were not married until we were 40. And so at that point, my eggs were old and tired and useless. His guys were raring to go. So the long story short, and perhaps we'll get into more detail, is that we ended up, after 6 years of effort, we ended up with 3 kids. One was my genetic child from a previous marriage, and one is adopted, and one was born from a donor egg. So I have actually written a book called One from Each Column, my 46-year trek from abusive childhood to elusive motherhood. And so our journey was arduous and daunting and triumphant.
Well, you certainly embody our organizational name of All Paths. You don't have all of them, few do, but you certainly can appreciate the diversity of ways there are to try to grow your family, for sure. And so can you talk a little bit more about how you came to those different paths? So you mentioned that once your husband and you got married at age 40, then you tried fertility treatment for a while before moving to adoption, or can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So the first thing that happened was a couple of, at least 2, and it may have actually been 3 miscarriages. And at that point, we decided to enter treatment. And that began with 2 or 3 rounds of IUI, intrauterine insemination. Those were literally fruitless. And then came a miracle pregnancy out of the blue when we were taking a break between IUI and IVF, which was going to be our next option. And that turned out to be ectopic. And so surgery, and then once I was recovered from that, then we began IVF. 3 rounds of IVF, using my own eggs. And again, no success. And we decided, I believe, as we began IVF, we decided to double track our effort. I mean, I wasn't getting any younger, neither were my eggs. And so we decided to pursue adoption simultaneously. And so I started exhaustive research in finding just the right agency. We ended up going with an agency at the time in Oregon. And after the 3rd IVF cycle was unsuccessful, soon thereafter came a call from the agency saying that one of their birth moms had chosen us, and we ended up adopting our daughter, Chloe. We had quite, at times, a hair-raising adoption story, but it was ultimately spectacularly successful. And then we decided we had the financial and emotional fortitude to pursue pregnancy one last time. And so with the help of our incredible social worker, at our clinic, we decided to go the donor egg route. Jay's sperm was still very viable. Now, at this point, I'm 45. And we decided to go to the donor egg route. And at 46, a couple of months after turning 46, our son Jack was born. And he was born 2 years to the day that our adoption of Chloe finalized.
Oh, cool.
And so then we had 3 kids, one from each column. Charlie, at the time that Chloe was born, was 9, and 11 at the time that Jack was born. And that's the story.
Well, that's lovely. So I definitely want to talk about the sibling dynamic. But before we get to that, you kind of alluded to some challenges during the adoption process. What were some of the most challenging moments along the way?
Well, it's very important for people to hear about our journey and know that this is not by any means the norm. So our birth mother, Chloe's birth mother, had an extraordinarily difficult, traumatic childhood, including a violent rape at the age of 14, that to our knowledge, she never was treated for with any kind of therapy. And so I don't know that she ever healed from that. And so that went on. And she also had a very unstable mother. So there was intermittent homelessness and on and on. And so that was challenging. Andrea at first decided, when we were en route to the hospital on the day that Chloe was born, we knew when she was being born because Andrea was a week past due, so they induced her. We were en route to the hospital, and the director of the agency called us to tell us not to come to the hospital, to go straight to our hotel. And that was our first sign that something was wrong. And then we learned that Andrea had changed her mind. And that, we believe, was as a result of her mother's pressure and insistence that she not go through with her adoption plan. So we went home without Chloe. And 6 weeks later, we got a call from the director saying, "Are you still interested? Andrea would like you to adopt her baby. She's fully aware that she's incapable of raising this child." And Andrea had only just turned 17 when she gave birth to Chloe. We said, "We'll be on the next plane." We went out, we got Chloe, we brought her home. And 3 months later comes a call from our attorney saying that Andrea wanted to revoke her consent. And that kicked off an 8-month process that ended in what was to be a hearing in front of a judge and ended up being settled literally in the 11th hour. And we appeared before the judge the next day so he could make sure that Andrea understood what, the ramifications of her decision. Is this what she in fact wanted? So that was quite harrowing, needless to say. But it's extremely important because I'm a huge believer in adoption, not just because of our own spectacular experience with adoption, despite the trauma. And it's so important to me for your listeners to know that that is absolutely not the norm by any means, and it's actually infrequent that happens.
I think you're so thoughtful to say that, but also I think it is good to know that it is possible, just so you're prepared emotionally. And of course, I just can only put myself in the place of all of you, that this is so difficult emotionally. You're literally on your way to Oregon and then you get that call. I can only imagine what that was like. And then obviously our hearts go out to the birth mom too, that obviously Absolutely. She was going through so much as well. And so, it just speaks to something we've talked about on this podcast a lot already and in our other work, that people suggest adoption like it is an easy, something that can be taken lightly, like just adopt. And to me, that's always so disrespectful to the beauty and complexity of adoption that,
And I would just interject that
yeah,
that the process should be arduous and should be
right.
complicated and should be difficult,
Mm-hmm.
because if anyone can even imagine giving birth to a child that you then decide to place for adoption,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost unimaginable. And
Right.
so it shouldn't be breezy and easy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. But you had things that weren't even, expected in terms of changing the plan and changing her mind and then changing again. And that really is very difficult. Must have been very difficult emotionally.
It was beyond difficult, but I want to just tell you a little story that speaks to, first of all, the incredible resilience and optimism of children, which is Charlie was 9. We got to the airport in New Jersey to head out to Oregon, and we had a car seat for Chloe. And we went to check in the car seat, and the agent at the ticket counter said, "Oh, are you traveling with the baby?" And before I could say anything, Charlie piped up and said, "We're on our way to pick up my baby sister." And I just thought, oh my God. And then on our way back from Oregon at the airport, checking in our car seat, and a different agent, of course, said, "Are you traveling with a baby?" And Charlie said, "Not this trip."
My goodness.
And I just thought, it was just miraculous that that was his heart and mindset. And I thought, I will take a page from my son's book. And then it all played out. It all played out just as we all hoped it would.
That's amazing.
That must be a treasured story in your family.
Absolutely. I'll never forget it till the day I
Yeah.
die.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
So, speaking of your family and all of your children, one question that I think a lot of folks have, particularly when they're experiencing secondary infertility or they're struggling to, continue to grow their family, is how to navigate this with the children you might already have. What conversations do you have with them? How do you explain in an age appropriate way the different paths that there are to actually building a family? So can you talk a little bit about how you navigated those conversations with Charlie and maybe with extended family, just to kind of give folks who are listening a little glimpse into how they might start their own conversations if that's something that they're struggling with right now?
Absolutely. And they can be very difficult conversations to have. I happen to be an open book. I'm I'm just a very open person, and I'm comfortable with that level of disclosure. But not everybody is, and that's just fine. One of my strong beliefs is that secrets sometimes, but especially within a family, secrets can be destructive. And so we talked to Charlie. Charlie knew, obviously, from a very young age that we wanted him to have siblings. And we talked to him all the time about it. His dad and I were divorced, and his dad went on to have 2 kids with his second wife. And Charlie was thrilled to have siblings, and he understood our desire to have additional children and to give him siblings in our family. So we talked to Charlie about that pretty much all the time. And then, of course, we talked to him about adoption, that this was one way to bring another child into our family. Then, from the minute we had our hands on Chloe, we started to talk to her about her origin story. We used all the words, and we just talked to her from the very, very beginning. And then when it was time, books and stories and on and on and on. And then when it was time to and we continued to talk to Chloe and Charlie about the fact that we really wanted to try to have another child. We were hoping to accomplish a pregnancy. And of course, we talked in very age appropriate terms. And fortunately, there are so many incredible resources out there people to speak to, counselors, advisors, social workers, physicians, therapists, clergy, family, friends, on and on, not to mention thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of books. And so we utilized all of those resources. And then when I was pregnant, we announced, and it was viable, and we knew that there was a heartbeat and so forth. We announced to Charlie and Chloe that I was pregnant and that soon there would be another baby. So in my book, I talk about the importance of your own personal boundaries, really determining what you're comfortable sharing and with whom and when. And so those are conversations that you have with yourself if you may be pursuing a child as an individual, as a single person, with your partner, with your parents, with your in-laws, with your friends, with your family. You want to really sort of parse that in advance if you can, and think about what you're comfortable sharing with whom and when. And also be prepared that people will offer their opinions and ask you questions that you have every right not to answer or accept. And so you want to think about what kind of response are you comfortable in giving if you don't want to answer a stranger's question. And we're a transracial family. Chloe is a brown person. And thank goodness there were never any questions about, wait, how is she your, I do not get it. How is she your daughter? But there were opposite comments where somebody said, I mean, look at me, I'm as white as you can get. And people would say, and Chloe's very olive, almost black eyes. And people would say to me, oh my goodness, she looks exactly like you. And I would say thanks if I wanted to, or I would say, well, that's interesting because Chloe's, depending on the circumstance, depending on the person, depending on the time, depending on my mental health at the time, so it's very important that people really spend time with those thoughts, with those decisions, so that they can be prepared for just all of it.
I love that advice of like really processing that internally, whatever internal it looks like for you, before you're tested by the real world questions or comments. And like you said, it might vary by the day, especially the tone might vary by the day, but you then have thought through those boundaries before you're required to test them. I love that.
I even suggest that people, as I said, come up with various responses and write them down and memorize them, and just be prepared, because there's nothing like, all the scouts in the world know there's nothing like being prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so you did go through a lot emotionally, through all these different ways of trying to grow your family. What were your biggest supports emotionally during that time?
First, I will say my husband and I were each other's biggest supports, and each of us individually were our own biggest supports, if I can say that. Because, and what I mean by that is that we were very, very fortunate in who we were and who we are just by nature. There are people who are much less sanguine and much less sort of, but don't let me mislead you. I say I live in two domiciles, on the ledge and on the ceiling. And thank goodness my husband has the capacity to talk me in off the ledge and scrape me off of the ceiling. So I am not, my husband's a Zen master. I'm the opposite. But I was incredibly fortunate not to obsess, as many people do, about what if this and what if that. And there are so many what ifs. And I'm happy to speak to some of those as well. But I didn't, I don't know why, I just didn't plague myself with those what ifs. We just plowed ahead beyond every obstacle. We, we got knocked down, we picked each other up, we took a breath, we dusted each other off, and we went off to the next option. And then family was incredibly supportive, but also, funnily, my mother, when I was almost 46 and announced to my mother that I was pregnant, and my mother was the funniest person I ever knew in my entire life. And she said to me, honey, you're either very courageous or really stupid. And because I knew her so as well as I did and loved her and adored her as much as I did, I was not at all put off by that. And I said, I think it's a little of both, Mom.
Yeah,
but
I love it.
I knew quite well what I was getting into at the age of 46, having a newborn. And it just didn't matter to me at all. And, and there were a million stories about, taking the kids to nursery school. And so a mother sitting next to me, today's my birthday. Oh, happy birthday. How old are you? And I was 48 at the time, and she was turning 30.
Yeah, you're like, okay, enjoy it, honey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, you mentioned that you used a lot of books, particularly children's books, in talking to your children. What inspired you to write your book? Did you feel like, well, obviously you have a story to tell for sure, but were you also feeling a little bit like, I didn't see my story anywhere else? And it sounds like you looked a lot.
That's a fabulous question. That's a really fabulous question. I happen to love answering this question. So when I was pregnant with Jack, my youngest, I ran into a friend and I told her I was pregnant. And she was, of course, so happy, and kisses and hugs and jumped up and down. And I said, what's really interesting is that when this kid is born, I will have a genetic child, I will have an adopted child, I will have a donor egg baby. And she said, oh my God, Jodi, that's amazing. You should write a book. Oh my God, you should call it One from Each Column. I said, that's an amazing idea. I'm going to write a book.
So I hope the book is dedicated to her.
It's absolutely. 26 years later, Jack is now 26. A neighbor who is a writer and knew my story said to me, just in passing in conversation, oh, by the way, Jodi, she said, if you don't write your story, I'm going to write it as fiction. I sat down that night and started writing. 26 years after that conversation with Helene, I sat down and started writing. And the book was going to be simply, well, not simply, it was going to be mainly the story of our story, our navigating and succeeding in building our family. However, it turned out to be a much bigger book. And so there are two narrative arcs in this book. I experienced abuse as a kid, emotional and psychological abuse as a kid, occasional violence in my household, intimidation, and so forth. And so while I did not intend to write that story, it started pouring out. And it started pouring out because so much of what I experienced and what I became as a person as a result created in me the ability to power through anything. And there were a lot of things, between leaving my family and marrying Jay at 40, there were lots of things that I powered through. Some life-threatening choices and decisions, and some 2 failed marriages by the age of 38, and on and on. And when Jay and I were married and we were faced with what was, for us, the biggest challenge of our life, despite all of what I'd been through, this was the biggest challenge. And I had no doubt in my mind and in my guts that I would power through this and make it happen. And so that's sort of the dual narrative arc of this story. And Jay and I have such, I don't expect it's utterly unique, but it's fairly rare, I think, our experience of having 3 kids, as I like to say, who arrived via 3 different modes of transport. And so when I was 11, I'm going to digress for a moment. When I was 11, I asked my mother if Jewish girls could become nuns. And she said, she didn't laugh at me because she loved me so much. And she said, I don't know, honey, but why do you want to become a nun? And I said, and I've always been an absolutist in my thinking, black, white, all, none. And I said to her, because it seems to me that nuns live the most selfless lives of anyone on the planet. And that's what I want to do. I have always, always wanted to just be as helpful as I possibly can to humanity. And this is my biggest opportunity to do that, is to tell my story, our story, and help people navigate those very choppy, very challenging waters and reach their safe haven, their cove, and build their children with confidence and joy. And I think I have the opportunity to do that. And that's why I wanted to write this book.
Great.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I just love that. And I think it's so interesting, but actually not surprising that you sort of set out to write one book and then it brought up all this memories and experience from your younger years that were so challenging. But I think you're right. It kind of is understandable that that was the foundation of your resilience.
That's exactly right. That's exactly perfectly put, Kate. Perfectly put. That was the foundation of my resilience. And what I like to say is that as I was navigating my childhood, it became very clear to me when I was about 6 that I could either be scared out of my wits or I could be absolutely furious. And I chose the latter. Because as I say in the book, I realized that fury could save me and fear could cripple me. And so I went through life as a furious pit bull, just utterly determined nothing would ever stop me from getting whatever it was that I wanted.
I love it. Well, I feel like I'm leaning into the fury lately, because if I lean into the sad aspect of this, I feel like I'm very incapacitated. But if I lean into the fury, I usually then have to take action because it's too much burning to sit still. So
that's exactly right. And the fact is that anger is an active emotion. Anger and rage and outrage, those are very active emotions. Fear is the opposite. Fear stops us in our tracks. Fear can paralyze us. Yeah. And so, and I also want listeners to understand that I am not advocating for jumping up and down, tearing your hair out, spitting blood fury. I'm talking about, which I did for quite a number of years. And thank goodness I was able to learn, and my brilliant therapist helped me learn that tempering that is a good thing, but a good, clean, healthy, purposeful, reasonable rage can be very productive.
We support it. It's all paths approved for sure.
Yeah.
So what do your children think of the book? I'm assuming that they've all read it. Is it weird for them to see their story on the page?
It's been very intriguing and mysterious to me. They have not read it.
None of them.
No, Charlie's a little nervous about reading it because I speak about my failed marriages. I speak about his dad. And I have assured him that I speak about his dad with love and understanding, compassion, sensitivity, and respect. But he's still nervous about reading it. And I understand that. And if he never reads it, that's okay with me. He says he will read it but he wants to wait till it's in book form. So he's not reading it on his phone or his iPad, which is the form that my manuscript is in. He wants to sit down with a book in his hand. So perhaps he will. Chloe and Jack, I honestly, and I haven't pushed them because it's their decision to make. They know what the book is about. They know that there are chapters, lots and lots of information about them. They know that I speak about them as any mother would in most glowing terms. And Jack was fearful that I might have written something that would embarrass him. And so he wanted to read the sections about him, which he read with his then girlfriend, now fiance. And they both felt, I'm not comfortable with you saying this about me. And I said, no worries, it's gone.
Taken out. Yep.
Yep. And is this okay, Jack, if I say it this way? Or is it okay if I say it? So we went through that process. Chloe is my absolute enigma. If I live to be 2 million, I will never really understand my daughter. She is an absolute mystery to me in many, many ways. And unlike her mother, she plays it very close to the vest. She plays life, all of life, very close to the vest. So it's not surprising, but she's being very helpful to me also with respect to, I have to do some social media marketing, and she's being so helpful to me with that. And
that's great.
So
she's doing what she can, and like you said, you don't even know what she's doing that you don't know about.
That's exactly right.
So when does the book come out?
The book will be launched in early to mid-April.
That's great. And we'll be sure to put info about your book and all of your links, your website, socials, etc., in the show notes for this episode. So as we wrap up, there are 2 questions that we'd like to ask all of our guests, and you can answer them in whatever order you'd like. But the first question is, what is one thing that you would say to someone who is just starting to grow their family? And the flip side is, what's one thing that you wish people would stop saying when someone lets them know that they're struggling to build their family?
Really great and exceedingly pertinent questions, even profound questions. So to answer the first question, I want people to, as we talked earlier, I really want people to think ahead. I want them to really sort of pull things apart and figure things out for themselves. And one of the most important things to figure out, I believe, is what's the goal? What's the ultimate goal? For some people, the goal is pregnancy. They want so deeply to experience pregnancy. And while pregnancy can be wondrous, it can also be a lot less than wondrous. And so that's one goal that people have. People may want to, pass on their genetic legacy and pass on their family traditions and rituals and experiences and all of that. And in my opinion, the goal is parenting. Because you're pregnant for 9 months and then you're not pregnant. And of course, many people see pregnancy as an opportunity to give birth to, obviously, a genetic child. And that's very important to many. But in my experience and my opinion, parenting is the goal. And I find that to be very promising, a very promising, uplifting, and positive goal, because if for some reason a pregnancy is not possible or a genetic child is not possible, there are options by which one can still become a parent. And I strongly believe that in any arena in life, when options exist, success is possible. So I want people to think about parenting and understand that when Jay and I, after Jack was born, Jay and I started to talk to individuals one-on-one. Our social worker would call and say, could you please talk to so-and-so? They could really use your guidance. We spoke on panels. We really engaged with a lot of folks that were in the throes of it all. And one of the burning questions that seemed universal, and it seemed even more pressing for men, was this notion that, this fear that if they had to go to alternative methods, that I can't love a kid, I'm not going to be able to love a kid who's not mine. An adopted kid is not going to be my kid. A donor kid, a baby born from donor sperm, that's not really my kid. I can't raise somebody else's kid. And we would speak to that fear and that concern. And that's maybe the overarching thing that I want people who are in the midst of building their family to know, is that there's, and I know this because I lived this, there is exactly zero difference between how you love, how you bond with, how you raise a child, regardless of the road they took to find their way home. There's zero difference. And what I like to tell people is that to this day, I sometimes forget that I didn't give birth to Chloe. I find myself thinking, did I have morning sickness with Chloe like I did with Charlie? I find myself thinking, Jack is more me in his nature than any of my other two kids. So I want people to know that your goal, hopefully you'll understand that your goal is to parent. And parenting is in the doing. It is not in the pregnancy. You don't become a parent until your child is here. In a way, as a practical matter, you don't become a parent until your child is in front of you. And so that's what I want people to know. As for the second question, I still hate it when people say to me, things happen for a reason. Things are, maybe this just wasn't meant to be, or a person with secondary infertility. Well, you already have one child. Think about how lucky you are. Why do you need another one? Or a person who's decided to end their journey, to end the effort. People say to them, living without children is so much easier and so much less expensive. And I mean, and perhaps there's well-meaning and kindness in all of that, but it's just so unhelpful. And maybe a person is not of the belief system that things happen for a reason, that everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. Maybe that's not their belief system. And who on earth would want to adopt the belief that, well, I'm just not meant to be a parent?
100%. Anything that just completely invalidates the person's experience. I mean, if someone's sharing this, that this is what's going on in their life, they need you to be there and hold space for them, not to, just completely invalidate everything that they're saying in response.
Exactly right. Oh, yeah. And another thing I would like to say is, and this is related to the whole topic, not necessarily to your two questions, but I would love to see a great deal more advocacy and effort out in the world for more education, more information, more awareness. For example, I think young women in their 20s should be educated about fertility, and when fertility fades, and when fertility is unlikely, and so on and so forth. I think they should be educated early about options. I think people need to be educated about how to speak to someone who's in the midst of infertility. There should be a whole effort out in the world to educate all of the different players in these various scenarios on all kinds of topics. And somehow, hopefully, that will happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, we do what we can to normalize the conversations around fertility, infertility, all the different family building arts. So it sounds like you're doing a lot on your part too. So, hopefully public discourse will catch up.
Thank goodness for you guys, and for all of the organizations and associations like you, because you are one of the too few ports in the storm for someone in the midst of the hurricane. And I'm just so glad to know you're there. And I'm so glad to have this wonderful, wonderful opportunity to talk with you. And I just so appreciate it more than I can say.
Us too.
So we've loved chatting with you too. Thank you so much for sharing, your whole family story. It's not just your story, it's all five of you. So thank you for sharing that with us today and with our listeners.
It's been my complete pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
We hope you'll join us next time for more family building stories and resources. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you never miss an episode. And follow us on social media at allpathsfb, or visit our website, allpathsfb.org, for more information about our work. All Paths Family Building is so grateful to the members of our circle of support who are vital to our ability to provide emotional support, education, and advocacy that is open to anyone struggling to grow their families. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please help spread the word so that anyone who is struggling to grow their family can join the conversation. It's an honor to walk with you on your family building journey.
So, Emily, I know we are now podcast hosts, but we're also podcast fans, and it can be hard to figure out what new podcasts you should listen to. Do you have any suggestions of how you can find what we should be listening to?
I do. So I find a lot of shows through word of mouth, but also podcast the newsletter has been a really great resource. That's actually how I found a couple of my favorite shows. Lauren from Tink Media listens to like zillions of shows and then every week shares the best stuff that she's heard from, huge popular shows. If you're wondering like, okay, is the hype actually worth it? All the way down to tiny indie ones that you've never heard of.
Sounds cool.
Yeah. And she also interviews people who are making shows, and it's a very cool resource.
So if people want to subscribe to Podcast the Newsletter, how do they do that?
Go to podcastthenewsletter.com. And you can also pitch her a show if you are listening to one that you're like, oh, this is great. I wonder if Lauren knows about it. You can drop suggestions to her at her email, lauren@tinkmedia.co. It's a great way to get your favorites out to other listeners.
Does she already know about us?
Yes, she does.